keep saying one more, but we are going to look at economic changes now because once the war is over, the South changes. There is no more enslavement. And a lot of black people are looking for their own land now, and they don't want to sign these contracts with their white employers because they are afraid that they're just binding themselves to a new form of enslavement, which is a legitimate concern because they are. And they are looking for wage labor. And they're also looking for land. A lot of black people feel like they are owed the land because they have developed it, and they are not wrong, right? Their ancestors have built that land, they have worked on that land. One formerly enslaved man, Bailey Wyatt, is quoted telling the Union Army after they move him in off of the they move him and a group of freed people off the Union Army settlement. He says to them, "We has a right to the land where we are located. For why? I tell you, our wives, our children, our husbands has been sold over and over again to purchase the lands we now locates upon. For that reason, we have a divine right to the land. And then didn't we clear the land and raise the crops of corn, of cotton, of tobacco, of rice, of sugar, of everything? And then didn't them large cities in the north grow up onto cotton and the sugars and the rice that we made? I say they has grown rich and my people is poor." He's got a fairly solid argument there, right? Like, we are owed this land. We have worked it. We have been here. You have benefited from it. Give us this land. But it is a constant challenge to find land for the freed people, even with the Freedmen's Bureau. Displaced black people need to be resettled, but they're homeless and they're penniless. And some of them have been thrown off the land by the landowners. Others refuse to be there because that is a house of horror for them. And again, they refuse to sign these labor contracts, and they insist that the land belongs to them. So a lot of this also goes back to a pre-war promise that they were made, especially in South Carolina and Georgia, that the federal government was going to redistribute abandoned and confiscated lands in 40-acre plots around Christmas time or in early 1866. So the rumor had come from the congressional bill that had created the Freedmen's Bureau, as well as this Confederate fear during the war that the federal government's plan to seize their land and give it to formerly enslaved people. And so it is that concept of 40 acres and a mule, but it's never actually put into practice by the government. I don't know if they ever actually planned on it. Maybe it's just a rumor. But it never comes to fruition, and blacks have to acquire land wherever they can to achieve economic security. And yes, they are the ones who do the land work, but they have to have the land to work it. And there's a difference between ownership and farming. And so in some places, blacks are allowed to buy property, but they're usually removed from it later on. In Georgia, by 1874, blacks in Georgia own more than 350,000 acres of land because they have bought it. But white hostility to black land ownership, especially in those states with large black populations, typically prevents freedmen from becoming significant proportion of the people who acquire land. Turns out, like anything else, millions of whites end up being primary beneficiaries to the Southern Homestead Act, which is just like the American Homestead Act, which offers this ability to buy land for a small amount of money. It is much more beneficial to the white community than the blacks. And by 1876, when the Southern Homestead Act is repealed, only 4 to 8% of freed families own land in the South. Much more white families do. A lot of people end up giving up their dream of living in the South and moving to the North. However, for the most part, up until the 1900s, black people do stay in the South, and black population in the South's 10 largest cities doubles in size, while the white population only grows by 10%. And so we really need to deal with this population. And so a compromise comes up that is going to solve the economic problems the South is facing, as well as the free people's need for land, work, and money. And we are going to introduce this concept of sharecropping. Again, there's a huge difference between owning land and farming land. So, African Americans, formerly enslaved people, they are resisting this coercive conditions and these contracts that are going to force them into another form of enslavement. They are rejecting anything that is similar to enslavement. They would prefer to work in their own small groups, in their own small homes. These small groups are known as squad systems, where the small family groups will work together. But the wage system is not great because the planters typically don't pay. And what are they going to do about it, right? The typical experience is that you go work, and then when the time comes to get your wages, for some reason, the planter doesn't pay you. And so sharecropping will solve this problem. Kind of. White people need somebody to work their land. Black people have the ability to work their land, and all they need to do is get paid. So they come up with a system where a black family would sign a contract with a white landowner. The black contract signer then has responsibility over the cultivation of crops on a specific plot of land and ownership of a percentage, which is usually a third to a quarter of the harvested crop. Not the land, they have an ownership of the crop. The land itself still belongs to the landowner. They are renting this land. But in order to farm the land, you need tools, you need animals, you need fertilizer, and to buy any of that, you need money. And so black families quickly realize that they are still dependent on the white planter to provide them with these resources, which essentially locks them into a debt spiral from which there is no escape. Because the cost of maintenance is so great at the end of the year that most sharecroppers end up indebted to their employers for most of what they had made, and sometimes more than what they had made. So they are not enslaved anymore, but they are stuck on this land. They can't pay off the debt. And the white South recovers much more rapidly than the formerly enslaved. And by 1880, the South is producing more cotton than ever, and sugar profits are improving again. And black farm workers are the ones who are contributing to this economic recovery without gaining much for themselves. The wages that are paid to the sharecroppers are usually less than those paid to the hired slaves of the Old South. They're making less money as a free sharecropper than they might have made when they were enslaved. And that is saying a lot because enslaved people were not making a lot of money. So many sharecroppers end up living in the old slave quarters of the plantations or in shacks built on the land by the white owners, but they don't have the money to buy their way out of debt. And so now they've put themselves inadvertently and unfortunately into a new form of enslavement because you can't leave if you owe somebody debt. We also have women who are doing their own thing. Women and children leave the fields and they are going to work in women jobs. A lot of them want to take care of the household. They don't want to do outdoor work. They would be hired by white families and then they would be fired for refusing to do more than what their job required. So if a white woman was hired to be a nanny and then was also expected to cook and clean and wash, she would leave. Or the family would fire her because she'd say, I'm not doing that. And they, again, white people are horrified that the black people are not doing this for them. And especially for women who had kept their children and their husbands had been sold or traded away, they're their sole providers. So they have to work wherever they can find it. And a lot of them end up being domestic laborers. They work in the houses, they do laundry, they do the things that you need to do to survive while they send their children to school because they need their children to go to school and be educated so that they do not get trapped into this cycle. Women are mistreated. Obviously, they have to worry about sexual assault along with many other things. And a lot of whites look down on the black women who don't work, even though white women are supposed to not work. And they also look down on black women who dress like white women. They're considered insolent because this idea that a black woman could dress and act the way a white woman did was just too much social equality. And they can't handle that. They can't even handle them being free. Forget social equality. So white women and black women are not equal, and black women don't even get the chance to be equal, whereas for a little bit during Reconstruction, black men get the chance to be equal.